Jessy had always heard about the old Kessler house, an isolated building atop a hill where the wind seemed never to rest. Since childhood, she had heard whispers about disappearances, rituals, shadows that moved on their own, and screams that echoed through the early morning hours. But for her, now 17 and trying to prove to herself that none of it was just superstition, the house was just another abandoned building like so many others in the area. Still, there was something about that cloudy afternoon that made the air heavy, as if the whole world were holding its breath as she crossed the rusty gate. The sharp creak, almost a lament, echoed through the empty lot and made the nearby birds suddenly flee. But Jessy, driven by a mixture of courage and stubbornness, kept going. The house's facade seemed to watch her with its broken, dark windows, like deep-set eyes incapable of blinking. Remnants of old curtains swayed in the wind, like weak hands waving from within the darkness. The porch floor was littered with splinters of wood, and the planks creaked under her every step, as if protesting her presence. Pushing open the front door, the sound echoed so loudly it seemed like an ancient voice awakening from a deep sleep. The smell of mold filled her nostrils, along with an unsettling feeling of crossing an invisible boundary, as if the house had just recognized its new visitor. Inside, the dim light swallowed the brightness outside. Jessy turned on her flashlight and surveyed the enormous room, filled with furniture draped in dirty sheets. Each step stirred up dust and cast shadows on the walls. She walked slowly, trying to stay focused on why she had come there. She wanted to find any clue that would disprove the local stories, something that would prove the house was nothing more than an old, forgotten building. But the further she went, the more intense the feeling of being watched became. It was as if the invisible eyes that had followed her since the gate were now closer, almost breathing down her neck. That's when she felt something strange beneath her feet. The floor, until then uneven, made a hollow, different sound. She bent down and ran her hand over the worn wood until she found a thin, almost imperceptible line marking the separation between two planks. Her heart raced. Something was hidden there. With effort, she pulled the wood and revealed a dark, deep opening from which came air as cold as that of a tomb. A narrow staircase descended to a basement that made no sense, since the house plans published in the city archives showed no underground space. The discovery seemed wrong, as if it had been left there so that no one would find it, or so that no one would escape after entering. Jessy felt her throat tighten, but curiosity was stronger. Jessy took a deep breath before descending, feeling the cold wood of the stairs vibrate slightly under each step as if pulsing. The flashlight illuminated only a few inches ahead, revealing damp stone walls that seemed to have been hastily excavated. The air was so thick it was like breathing inside a bad dream, too heavy to be real. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, the feeling of being watched intensified. She swung the light around, but the beam seemed too weak to overcome the darkness. It was as if the darkness itself were alive and pushing the light back, refusing to reveal its secrets. The small room was less than 4 meters wide, but the space seemed to extend beyond what her eyes could see. There were deep scratches on the walls, as if human fingernails or something very similar to human ones had desperately tried to climb out. The smell of rust mixed with something sweet and rotten permeated the air, making her stomach churn. The table in the center of the basement seemed completely out of place in that environment, like an improvised altar for something that should never have been revered. When she lifted the dark cloth covering it, the visual impact was so great that she took a step back. The photographs were scattered chaotically, as if someone had hastily rummaged through everything before fleeing or been dragged away. In all the images, the same girl appeared at different times, in different clothes, but always with the same blank expression and eyes that seemed fixed on the observer. The presence of that figure in all the portraits caused a strange disturbance, as if the girl were trapped not only in the photo, but there, in the basement itself, observing Jessy with the same unsettling coldness. The flashlight began to fail the instant Jessy found the last photo. The image was of her, taken that same morning, with sunlight streaming through the window of the house where she lived. The same expression, the same tilt of her head, the same distracted look she remembered giving herself in the mirror before leaving. On the back, a date, 3 days later. Her hands trembled so much she almost dropped the photograph. The air in the basement seemed to close in around her, as if invisible walls were slowly closing in. Then she heard it. A thin, dragging sound coming from behind her. Jessy turned the light quickly, but saw nothing. The silence was so absolute that she began to doubt she had heard anything. But then the sound came again, louder this time, scratching, slow, like fingernails scraping stone, accompanied by an irregular breathing that echoed through the basement with a rhythm that didn't seem human. A chilling sensation ran down her spine, as if someone had breathed on her neck. She took a step back, but her body was stiff, heavy, as if something were holding her ankles. The flashlight blinked 3 times, and in that small interval of light between one flash and another, Jessy saw. In the farthest corner of the basement, where darkness swallowed everything, 2 eyes opened. Dull, lifeless eyes, too large for the pale face that slowly emerged from the shadows. The figure of the girl from the photos dragged herself forward with irregular, broken movements, as if her bones weren't aligned correctly. Each gesture seemed painful, yet inevitable, as if she were being pushed by forces greater than herself. Jessy instinctively recoiled, stumbling across the table, scattering photos across the floor. The girl kept coming, now emitting a sound that seemed like a mixture of crying and stifled laughter. Her fingers touched the floor with the softness of someone who never learned to walk properly. When the flashlight went out completely, Jessy screamed, but the sound died in the air, muffled by the suffocating presence in the basement. Her heart beat so fast it felt like it was about to burst her ribs. In a final flash of courage, she lunged towards the stairs, groping along the walls as she climbed desperately. Each step creaked as if it were about to break, and behind her the scratching sounds accelerated, getting closer and closer. When she finally reached the floor of the house, she jumped up, pushed the plank back into place, and ran out without even looking back. Her lungs burned, her legs threatened to give way, and the world around her seemed darker than when she had entered. Jessy didn't stop until she reached the road. There, with trembling hands and the metallic taste of fear in her mouth, she took a deep breath, trying to convince herself that it had all been just a figment of her exaggerated imagination. But when she got home, she found the front door ajar. The interior was too silent. On the living room table was a single envelope, her name handwritten in thin, old-fashioned script. Inside the envelope was a new photograph. Jessy, seen by the camera at an impossible angle. It was as if someone had positioned themselves directly behind her the moment she opened the door. The light, the shadow, the position, everything too perfect to have been taken by chance. On the back there was a date, not 3 days ahead, not in the future. The date was yesterday. Jessy felt her blood run cold when she realized that if the photo had been taken yesterday, then the creature wasn't chasing her. It was already with Jessy before she even entered the house. It had already been watching her. It had already been following her, perhaps since childhood, perhaps forever. When the wind blew through the open window and the house lights flickered, Jessy understood that the basement hadn't been a beginning. It had been a reunion, and as the photograph slipped from her fingers, she heard behind her the same dragging sound from the basement, slowly approaching down the dark hallway. The dragging sound echoed down the hallway as if something were being pulled, not hastily, but with a cruel certainty that there was no need to run. Jessy stood motionless, her whole body rigid, while her breath began to falter. The air felt colder inside, as if the house itself had held its breath to watch what was to come. She didn't want to turn around. Every part of her body begged her to stay still, but the darkness behind her seemed to close in, embracing her in the shadow of the door. When she finally mustered the courage to look over her shoulder, the light flickered, and for a second, too short but enough, the figure was there. The same girl from the photos, standing a few meters away, her head tilted unnaturally, as if her neck had been broken many times. Her eyes were deep, lifeless, dark wells that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. And there was something more now, a fragile smile, small, but so distorted it seemed to have been forcibly drawn on her face. Jessy stumbled backward, trying to reach the door, but her back collided with something. Something tall, something that breathed. Slowly, almost unable to move her neck, she looked up and saw another figure behind her, even darker than the shadow. There was no face, only a human outline that seemed made of smoke. It leaned over her as if analyzing her, and for a moment Jessy felt a cold hand touch her shoulder, the same sensation she had felt in the basement, the same presence that she now understood had never been trapped in the house. It had always been with her. The figure in front of her moved, dragging one foot after the other, while the shadow behind her approached as if to swallow her whole. Jessy tried to scream, but her voice wouldn't come out. She tried to run, but her legs felt like roots stuck to the ground. All she could do was close her eyes and wait for the cold impact of those impossible hands, but nothing happened. Silence filled the room. The house, which had previously seemed alive, was now completely still, as if waiting for something. Jessy slowly opened her eyes. The figures had vanished. The room was empty. The envelope was on the floor. The door was open. The wind was blowing in through the window. For a brief moment, she thought she had fainted, that it had all been a hallucination brought on by panic. But then she heard something behind her. Not footsteps, not breathing, but the sound of a click. The crisp sound of a camera. She turned quickly and saw, on the sofa, an old Polaroid. The same one that appeared in some of the photos in the basement. The camera was shaking on its own, as if held by invisible hands. The paper began to come out of the opening, slowly revealing the printed image. When the photo finished forming, Jessy felt her heart stop for a second. The image showed herself, standing in the center of the room, exactly as she was at that moment. But behind her, in the darkness of the hallway, the pale figure of the girl smiled, and a black arm, made of shadow, encircled her shoulders. Not in the past, not in the future, at that very instant. Jessy dropped the photo. Her breath caught in her throat. She ran toward the door, but the moment she crossed the threshold, the air around her shifted. The sky was darker than it should have been. The neighboring houses were dark. The silence of the street was unnatural, too profound. And then she realized something devastating. The door behind her no longer led to her house. She looked over her shoulder and saw the interior of the Kessler house. Not her living room, not her home. The old, abandoned house with the basement breathing down like an open well. It was as if it had been pulled back, as if it had never truly escaped. Jessy tried to open the door again, but the wood slammed shut with such force that the impact made her hands tremble. She banged, pushed, screamed, but the door wouldn't budge. The whole house began to creak, as if it were animated, awake, hungry. And down the hallway, with slow, dragging steps, the shadow approached again. But this time, it wasn't just observing. When it finally reached Jessy, the whole house seemed to take a deep breath. The lights flickered, the structure trembled, and darkness took over everything. When silence returned, only one photograph remained lying on the floor beside the door. An image of Jessy standing on the Kessler's porch, looking directly at the camera, with a smile too empty to be hers. On the back of the photo, there was no date. Only 4 words written in the same thin, old handwriting. You were already here.